So last but not least, we've got this new radio bezel. Now, this is the part number from Mazda that at least on this car you could still get from the dealership, ordered brand new from Mazda. And this car is cracked here, cracked here, cracked here. It's just falling apart. So, really cool, you could still get the factory part from Mazda. And let's see what we need to do to put it on. Looks like we've got a couple of screws here in the bottom, and we're just gonna go for it. So, let's see what we need to do to get this thing off. I believe, yeah, there's a screw underneath the ashtray. We've got a couple of screws here on the side. And I'm assuming there's one in the center console here. Looks like we've got two in the center console. And now I'm hoping that this thing will just lift up and out of the way. At least if we can get it back far enough to get the screws, or if there's any screws left on the front part of this console. Looks like we've got another screw here at the bottom left that is not hardly screwed into anything anymore because there is not much left of this radio bezel. Now, looking at it, it looks like that is all the fasteners. We've got a couple of clips that it looks like we're going to need to pull off from the dash. And this is probably going to come apart in a bunch of pieces because it is so old and brittle. Like I said, this thing's going to come off in multiple pieces because it was so cracked. We'll be able to play Legos here and put this back together. Jeez. Yeah, like I said, it looks like somebody has glued the thing, hot glued, super glued it all back together. And like I said, it is just crumbling to pieces. Now, one thing I did notice just now as we were pulling it apart, there are two more screws up here that looks like you need to get to them from the air vents. Obviously, in our case, it didn't matter because this poor thing was falling apart. But if you're taking yours out knowing you need to save it, you obviously need to get these air vents pushed out and get to the screws. Now it looks like the air vents are just held in with a couple of spring clips. And you'd be able to pull straight out on those. Like I said, mine, we were just able to take it off since it was already so destroyed. So we'll set our air vents to the side. We've obviously got our hazard switch and headlight switch we need to switch over. So we will get those last two screws that we should have pulled out through the air vents, but in our case we didn't need to because the poor air vents were kind of gone, or the dash bezel was kind of destroyed, and those are outrageously tight. My goodness. So we'll get those out. And yeah, as I'm pulling this out, all the parts and pieces are just crumbling to bits in my hands. Now we will get our center switch bank here swapped over without losing the screws. We will get those screws back in, and obviously we need to be extremely careful since the new radio bezel is not fragile, but the old switch surely is. Because that's the last thing we need to do is break some old 30-year-old part that is unobtainable. And go. So one thing I did notice on this new one, it looks like it's missing 2 of these spring clips. So I'm going to go ahead and steal them off of the old bezel and get those 2 spring clips back on, because there's holes for all 3, but we've only got 1 clip from the factory. There was nothing else in the box, so I don't know if they forgot to put the other 2 in, or maybe you're just supposed to swap them over. So let's see how bad that's going to be. Here is our bottom one. Oh, it's so crumbly. It is just, parts are flying. Okay, yeah, that comes off not very nicely, but the fact that mine is so crumbly and old makes it kind of nicer. So we will swap this over to the new one. Okay, so off camera, I just battled with that thing. Those are extremely hard to get pressed back in. I ended up taking some pliers and kind of pinching the end so it would slide in a little bit better, but my goodness, those do not go in and out very nicely. So I can understand why they were forgotten at the factory, because those are horrible, horrible to install. And unfortunately, I need to do it one more time. So with the old piece, this is, like I said, this thing is crumbling apart. Luckily on mine, I can just bend it to the side a little bit, and mine just explodes apart because it's so brittle. And now what I was doing, I was just kind of smashing these tangs down a little bit to make them a little bit narrower so they would hopefully go into the new panel. Obviously the new panel shouldn't be brittle, but this thing was quite expensive from the dealership. You know, obviously if it breaks, you could get another one, but I kind of don't want to have to buy it again, so I want to relieve as much pressure as I can on this little fastener so it can go into the new piece and hold it tightly, but not be so outrageous to install. So, kind of unfortunate on Mazda's part for not putting those in, or at least all 3 of them, because that kind of sucks to buy a kind of expensive interior part and then have to do install on it before you can actually install it. But whatever, at least they still make the part. At least you can get your Miata, early Miata looking fresh still, since this part obviously does break from time to time. And again, I was just using these pliers to be able to press and slowly push that piece in because it's extremely tight. And also not try to break it at the same time. So we've got all 3 of our clips installed now. We should be ready to set it in place. We're going to tighten or hook our connector back up. get the bottom set in around the shift bezel and hopefully find our tangs that we put on. Now we are going to get our screws that we didn't have to take off originally through our air vents. And this bottom screw that had literally no plastic to actually attach anything to now has part of the plastic bezel to attach itself to, so it actually will be holding something. So that will be kind of cool. And that should be in. We're gonna bring the console back forward. And I kind of feel like I'm having to install this for the first time, since when I pulled it apart originally, it was so crumbly that half the parts and pieces weren't there. So now that everything's there, there's a few more pieces that it has to go around. There is a bunch of insulation around this shifter that needs to kind of go back in place so the center console is not sitting on it. Let's take a look at these vents. There is a couple of locating tabs on each side that we need to make sure go in their spot, and they clip in pretty nicely. Don't believe there is a top bottom other than just these sides that need to go into their clips. All right, we will get these last screws thrown in the center console here. And we should have a much nicer looking interior, because for as clean as this thing was, the poor radio bezel being in 10 different pieces and glued together and the glue falling off, and it didn't really meet the level that this thing looks like everywhere else. So, just like that, got a new radio bezel. Gosh, it looks so much nicer. It's a very clean, nice part. It seems to match relatively well. Obviously, the rest of the plastic looks maybe a little shinier, you know, if somebody's rubbed some Armor All or something on it, who knows. But it's at least not in 1,000 pieces now. It's a factory part, fits like it should. Had to swap those couple of clips over, but that's at least done now. Obviously, this thing still needs a massive cleanup inside and out, but at least now we've got some big parts replaced. There was one last part I was able to pick up from the dealership, and it's this factory front bumper decal. And if we take a look at this one, you can see that the top is peeling. It just doesn't look as nice as it could. So it was super cool with the VIN number, seeing that Mazda still offered that factory decal. Obviously, we aren't going to throw that on today, but we'll at least be able to put that on before or after the car gets a paint correction and have it look even more factory fresh, original, like it should have out of the factory. So hopefully you guys like seeing some of those kind of cool parts get thrown on. Cool of Mazda for still having those parts available from the dealership so you can keep it looking OEM and I will catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching.